Tu B'Av, we go from Tisha B'Av to Tu B'Av. That Tisha B'Av we know is the saddest day on the Jewish calendar, and Tu B'Av we'll see is one of the happiest days on the Jewish calendar. So the Gemara tells us in Tainus and Avram and Amid Beis, Amar of Shimon ben Gamliel. Shimon ben Gamliel says, Uhayu Yamim Tovim Yisrael B'Chamisha Asar B'Av U'B'Yom HaKippurim. That the two happiest days of the year are Yom Kippur and Tu B'Av. So Yom Kippur, everyone's aware of Yom Kippur. They're not necessarily aware that Yom Kippur is the happiest day of the year. Many people erroneously compare Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, which makes sense because functionally all they know is I'm not eating today, it's a 25-hour fast, and I can't wear shoes. So therefore many people assume it's a similar day. So functionally speaking there are similarities, but fundamentally there are totally different reasons why we're doing all these things. Yom Kippur, as we'll see, as the Gemara says, Bishom Yom Kippurim. Why is Yom Kippur one of the happiest days of the year? Bishom de Isbe Slichu Mechila. It's a day of forgiveness. It's a Yom Shenidno Bo Luchos Achronos. It's a day that the second tablets were given. And that's a separate discussion we'll say when we get closer to Yom Kippur. Rav Soloveitchik has a famous shtickle on this line in the Gemara here, because the Gemara makes it sound pashas. It's two different things. It's a day of Slichu Mechila, and it's a day the Luchos Shniyos were given. The Rav has the whole discussion based in the Beis HaLevi and the Drushas that perhaps the Hainu Hach, it's only because the Luchos Shniyos was given it's a day of Slichu Mechila. But we'll discuss that in about a month from now or so. But getting back to Tu B'Av, so we see Yom Kippur is the happiest day of the year because it's a day of forgiveness. It's a happy day. We're forgiven for all our sins. Ma'ashein Kain Tisha B'Av is the saddest day on the Jewish calendar. In fact, it's a universal day of Avelis, and the Rambam writes, even Bizman Ba'Yesheni Kayam, there are still aspects of Avelis going on because it's a universal day of Avelis. So Tisha B'Av is the saddest day on the Jewish calendar. Yom Kippur and Tu B'Av are the two happiest days on the Jewish calendar. And we see how motivation plays a critical role, because you could be doing the same things, but you could be doing it for totally different reasons. So on Tisha B'Av, you're doing it because it's a time of Avelis, even though it's a dual aspect of Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av has both aspects. It has an aspect of a Yom HaTainis. That's a similarity to Yom Kippur. But the fact is, Yemei Avelis has nothing to do with Yom Kippur. In fact, Yom Kippur can have Avelis, because we don't have Avelis on Yom Tov. So Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, we're both familiar with, and most people are familiar with those days. But Tu B'Av, forget about being the happiest day of the year. Many people have never heard of Tu B'Av. That's because it happens in the summer, and there's no school in the summer, and therefore a lot of people haven't heard of Tu B'Av. In fact, that's one of the reasons given, among which is a separate topic, about why some claim they didn't want to observe Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Day, under the rubric of Tisha B'Av. Obviously this isn't the main reason, it's more pedagogue, but one of the reasons thrown in is because we want to incorporate it into the educational system in Israel, but it'll be true anywhere, and therefore if we wait for Tisha B'Av, we don't really teach much about Tisha B'Av, because in the summer, of course, you can teach Tisha B'Av anytime, but at least I know teaching Tisha B'Av is one thing, observing Tisha B'Av is another. So that wouldn't be a reason why to pick a date. That's just an extra throw in at the end. Why, if you assume it's not an issue to pick its own day, so then you take their risk. If you hold like Rav Soloveitchik or others who feel strongly that Tisha B'Av is a day for all tragedies, obviously that would be a non-issue. But if you assume not like Rav Soloveitchik, then maybe there's what to discuss. So then that's another factor to consider when making the decision. But we'll get the full when we get to Yom Shoah, that's the time we could go into the whole discussion in detail. So either way, getting back here, the Gemara says the two happiest days of the year are Tu B'Av and Yom Kippur. So now we know Yom Kippur because it's the day of Slicha Mechila. So what happened on Tu B'Av? So the Gemara is going to marshal many things that happened on Tu B'Av. So number one, the Gemara tells us, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Yom Shehutru Shvatim Lavo Zeh Bazeh. You know why it's such a happy day? It's a day where we permitted intermarriage. Oh, I didn't know intermarriage was a good thing in Judaism. So what does that mean? Tu B'Av, it's the happiest. If that was the case, we'd be in a very happy society today, because unfortunately the intermarriage rate is very high. We have Tu B'Av was the day that it's happy because of intermarriage, so we'd be in happy times. But it's not what the Gemara means. Not that type of intermarriage. We're talking about intermarriage among the Shvatim. We're not talking about intermarriage between Jew and non-Jew. We are talking about intermarriage between the different tribes. Why wasn't there intermarriage before, and why is there now? So that's what the Mefarshim point out. We are all familiar with the story in Bamidbar, Perek Lamed Vav, Pasuk Vav, regarding the story of Benos Srafcha, the daughters of Srafcha. Srafcha was, according to some, he was a tzaddik. He was actually the Makoshesh Eitzim. If you read the Torah literally, he was the first Machal Shabbos in Jewish history, and maybe a big Russia, but doesn't mention him by name. That's the whole discussion in the Gemara Shabbos, that Rabbi Akiva mentions him, or one of the rabbis mention him, and then they say, why are you mentioning it? Lashon Hara. The answer is, so if you look at Torah, is one of the parshas where in Torah Shabbat you get one view, first Machal Shabbos in Jewish history, yet the Torah Shabbat tells us what a tzaddik this person was. He saved Klal Yisrael. So either way, that was Srafkat, according to some. So he had 5 daughters and no sons. So they went to Moshe and say, we don't have any brothers, can we get a Yerusha? Because normally the Yerusha went to the men. So Moshe said, good point, let me check with God. And Moshe gave them the 2 thumbs up. You are right. When there's no brother, you are going to get the Yerusha. So while Moshe was repeating this parsha about Benos Srafcha getting the Yerusha, so these are the psukim where the Torah tells us about a woman not being able to marry into another tribe. You know, it's because of real estate issues, that the problem was then it will go to a husband, and then in terms of the Shvatim having the appropriate land at the time. So at one point in Jewish history, it was prohibited to intermarry. It's intermarry among different tribes of Jews. So apparently on Tu B'Av, they figured out that this is only a horasha. This is only not a mitzvah l'doros. It wasn't a mitzvah for future generations. It was only limited to that time of when they were the time of Benos Srafcha, and therefore, when they entered the land of Israel with Yoshua, it applied only in that generation. But later on, so on Tu B'Av, they realized it was only for a temporary time, and therefore that's why it became a happy time now, because all Jews can marry other Jews, the different Shvatim, etc. That's the first reason the Gemara gives why Tu B'Av is one of the happiest days of the year.
Because of that event that happened on Tu B'Av? That event happened one time?
Right, it didn't actually happen. Is when they figured out.
When they figured it out.
Yeah, we don't, because it's unclear when what that day was when Moshe told. I don't think that was on Tu B'Av, but I think what the Gemara is saying is that the rabbis figured out there was only a Horasha. On Tu B'Av, they figured out that it's only a temporary thing, but really Jews can marry all Jews. That's why it was a happy time. And similarly here, the next thing the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Nachman, also it's nothing that happened on Tu B'Av, but they figured out that on Tu B'Av that it was limited. What was the second thing? Yom Shahutar Shevet Binyamin Lavo Bakal. It was the day where on the 15th of Av was the day that Shevet Binyamin was permitted to marry back into Klal Yisrael. Again, based on different psukim, because of what happened in Shoftim. I don't know if you know Shoftim because you're a big Shmuel guy, but I don't know if I should assume that you're on Shmuel so you know Shoftim. But either whether you're familiar with Shoftim or not, in Perach Chav Aleph, the terrible incident in Jewish history of Pelegish Begiva, and therefore the Klal Yisrael said they made a shvua. They're not going to give their daughters over in marriage to Shevet Binyamin. So later on the 15th of Av, it was ruled that they only meant to bind themselves. That's the specific people who did it, but the next generation was permitted to marry into Shevet Binyamin. So again, didn't happen. The event didn't happen on Tu B'Av, but Tu B'Av was a day where that it was realized that the girls could marry into Shevet Binyamin. So again, similar, totally different events, but on Tu B'Av it was realized that marrying into marriage among the tribes was only temporary. Then we realized we can marry all of Klal Yisrael. In a similar vein, also marrying into Shevet Binyamin. Interesting, I guess it fits in well because, as I don't know if we'll see today, but we see from the end of the Gemara that Tu B'Av was the time where people went to look for shidduchim. So I'm not sure. I guess maybe the focus here on marriage here are these two things that you could marry everyone. You can marry among all the tribes, and here, limiting the wedding part. So the end of the Gemara talks about how the Jewish women used to go out on Tu B'Av, perhaps Yom Kippur as well, and to look for shidduchim. So I just was thinking. I've read this Gemara many times, but it just popped into my head now, which seems, a pretty obvious connection. Number 3. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Yom Shekulo Bo Meisi HaMidbar. The 15th of Av was the day that the Jews realized that the Dor HaMidbar, that when the Jews went in and gave a evil report about the land of Israel, the whole sin of the Meraglim, so they were destined not to enter the land of Israel. Everyone was destined to die. Anyone between 20 and 60, and the new generation was going to enter Eretz Israel. So what happened was, every year on Tisha B'Av, they used to go ahead and used to go dig their own graves, literally, so to speak, the Medrash tells us, and they used to go to sleep. And then those who woke up got up. Those who didn't wake up, so the dead people didn't do it, but the people who were alive finished off the burial. They buried those people. And I guess, I'm not sure if it just happened that people only died on Tisha B'Av or not, but this is the practice the Medrash says. And this happened every year. So every year you had people died and people lived on. And towards the end of the 40 years, one year everybody went to sleep in their graves, and lo and behold, everyone woke up that year. So obviously they figured, we got the dates wrong. They didn't have calendars then. They didn't know exactly. So they did it again the next night, 10th of Av, the 11th of Av, the 12th of Av, until finally they go out and they see the full moon, and they realize it's like the 15th of Av, and they came to the conclusion that, wait a second, the Chaste Hashem, God's going to let even though we were destined to die and we deserve to, but the Chaste Hashem, He's going to let us live now. So interesting, it really, ironically, it really happened on the Tes B'Av, when actually the real miracle happened. Because at one time I did a mistake and I said on Tes B'Av, and then I said it actually was Tes B'Av. Because actually Tes B'Av is going to really happen, but Tu B'Av, again, is the time when we realized it happened, which is another yesod in terms of, it's not when the nes actually happened. From this Gemara, it's the Akaris HaNes, which is obviously true today, whether we're looking nisim that happen in Eretz Yisrael all the time or in the past. And it's the one thing to have the nes, but it's recognizing, and that's why Chazal tell us what's the prototype of all nisim? Kriyas Yamsuf, the miracle of the Red Sea. Why is that the prototype of all miracles? We had many miracles that happened In fact, many greater in quality. So what's the big deal? Why are you getting all worked up over Kriyas Yamsuf? So the many people. One is because what does the pasuk say? Vayaminu v'Hashem u'v'Moshe avdo oz Yoshia Moshe. That the Jewish people reached the requisite emunah in God and Moshe the servant. So many people see miracles all the time, but it doesn't do anything. You need the miracle has to be the association with the divine, and therefore the greatness of Kriyas Yamsuf, the Jews after the miracle of Kriyas Yamsuf, they strengthened their emunah, they came closer to God, and that's the metric of what a great nace is. So similarly here, it's the same idea is the nace really happened Tisha B'Av, but they didn't realize it until Tu B'Av, because at that point the nace happened, but they didn't realize it was Tisha B'Av yet. And we see from this Gemara anyway, at least in this area, we see the Yisod is the recognition of the nace seems to be greater than the actual nace, because they didn't say, okay, well on Tisha B'Av now we'll go back and say, obviously Tisha B'Av isn't going to be a day would be appropriate necessarily for a time of Shabbat V'Hodah, but actually Tisha B'Av is the day that actually God did do, and actually it's not crazy because as we have Soloveitchik's explanation on why we go on towards the 10th of Av, the Avelis gets more lenient. We start sitting on chairs. That's the day the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. So we should get stricter and stricter. So the Rav Soloveitchik, based on a Tosis and Kiddush and a Medrash, that was actually a Nechama, because that's only 8 Zvavanim, that's only metal and wood, that could be rebuilt. But at one point, Klal Yisrael thought we might be destroyed. So even how sad a day Tisha B'Av is in the 10th of Av, but there's a sense in Nechama on that day also, that thank God that Klal Yisrael. So there could be a sense in Nechama perhaps recognizing the nace as well. But either we see from here, the Gemara focuses on Tu B'Av. Tu B'Av is the day, again, also by the other things. It's not the day that it happened. It's the day that they realized that Tu B'Av is the day they realized that you could marry among the tribes. Tu B'Av is the day that you can marry Sheva Binyamin. So it seems the realization of the fact, it seems to be the key thing here. Moving on to number 4. So we have intermarriage among tribes, marrying Sheva Binyamin, and we have that the Mesi HaMidbar stopped dying. Number 4. Ula Omar Yom Shabite Hoshea ben Elah. Hoshea ben Elah, who was one of the kings, he was the last king of the northern kingdom of Israel, and during his rule, many things happened not really good for the Jewish people. He wasn't known as being a tzaddik, let's say, and yet everyone has their day. You don't have to be a tzaddik. You could be a rasha, but you could do some good things in your life. Life is very complex. I'm not going to get into the Joel Paterno issue, how you could do many good things, but if you do a pretty bad thing, you might be remembered. Your image may be tarnished forever, but that's a separate shir. But moving on, Hoshea ben Elah, I'm not comparing the two of them, but this came to mind. But Hoshea ben Elah wasn't necessarily the best king in the world for the Jews. Yet, what did he do? He did a good thing in his life. That Yeravam ben Nebat put guards on the road to prevent the Jewish people from going up to the Ola Regel. Hoshea ben Elah took the guards off the road. Not that he encouraged the Jews to do it, but Le'eser sheyirtzu yalu. You have the option now. You could go and worship Avodah Zarah somewhere else, and you could go to the Beis HaMikdash and worship God, Avodas Hashem there. So all he did was give them a choice. And yet the Chazal, the Gemara is telling us, this is a day to celebrate. Tu B'Av, one of them unbelievable day. Hoshea ben Elah did many terrible things in his life, but at least I'm not saying he only did one, but this is the one the Gemara singles out. He let the Jews, he took the guards off the roads, an indirect act, and he didn't say, okay, now you have to go. He said, if you want, I'll give you the option. Nevertheless, Chazal recognizes the great day in great day in Judaism. It's a day of simcha that we had the ability, we had access to Yerushalayim and the Beis HaMikdash. So some like pointing out, we'll discuss whether it's a good comparison or not, that we see from here, we know in 1967, we know we're familiar with Jewish history and current events that we took back Yerushalayim. In 1948 we got back the state, and in 1967 we took back Yerushalayim Era Kodesh. So some want to bring up proof to observing, to celebrating Yom Yerushalayim. Again, it's a whole independent topic in its own right, but since they quote this Gemara as a raya, I'll discuss the topic a little bit. They say what we see from this Gemara of mere access to Yerushalayim Era Kodesh. Chazal said, let's make a mixas yantiv, Tu B'Av. How much more so when we get Yerushalayim Era Kodesh itself back? How much more so that should be a time of celebration. And others will counter back and say it's not a good comparison, because in the case of Hoshea ben Elah, we were able to get the Beis HaMikdash back. We were Ola Rego. But here we still don't have the Beis HaMikdash. We just have Yerushalayim, which leads us to a very prevalent question: is has anything changed since 1967? Since we got back Yerushalayim in the halachic universe? Of course, in the reality of the Chasdei Hashem, there's nothing to discuss. I wouldn't say there's nothing. In most circles, there's nothing to discuss. Most recognize the Chasdei Hashem that we got back Yerushalayim. Maybe everyone recognizes the Chasdei Hashem. Their issue isn't that we have Yerushalayim today. They might have other political issues of having a state in that. But I don't know anyone who's upset that actually we have Yerushalayim. Maybe the fact that maybe it's under Jewish control, they might not like. I'm not exactly sure, but that's a separate discussion. So either way, so has anything changed since 1967? The fact that now that we have Yerushalayim Era Kodesh, does that change anything? So in fact, we just observed Tisha B'Av not too long ago, and one of the questions that come up in some circles is the question of saying Nachem. Nachem is a prayer we said at Mincha Tisha B'Av. The Yerushalmi discusses even saying it 3 times a day in all your tefillas. But our meaning is we say Nachem in Mincha, and the Rama writes because Nachem from Nechama, that we wait until after already Chatzos on Tisha B'Av, because that's when we have the Nechama. We realize we were no longer being destroyed, and we just have and that's a Nacham in its own right, and we start the Beis HaMikdash is being destroyed. So that's why our minhag is we do it at Mincha. But that's a discussion why Mincha, why not other ones. But that's what the Rama writes by Mincha. So the question is, what do we say in Nachem? Since it's been a couple of days already, I don't remember the exact text, but we talk about Yerushalayim in Bizoi, Charav, desolate, destruction, terrible Yerushalayim. And the question some Rabbanim raised post 1967, is this an appropriate prayer to say anymore? Should we say Nachem at least the way it is now? Because it's not true, isn't it? Mechse Kesheker. How could we say have you been to Yerushalayim lately? You've probably been there more recently than me, and it seems to be pretty built up, full of yeshivas, other things, beautiful buildings. So what does it mean? It's desolate. The average person would not call it desolate and bizoy and disgraceful. So what's pshat? So in fact, probably interesting. I think the Torah Tamima in the Sefer Baruch Shemar, Sefer and Biur Tefillah, he actually raises the question well before. I think he writes this in the 1940s, 1950s, even before there even wasn't, even before we even got. Well before 1948, even before we had a state, and certainly before we had Yerushalayim back anyway. I'm not sure exactly how he wrote it. He just entertains the question that maybe in a little while Yerushalayim is going to be built up, and then he just raises. He doesn't say what he would have done, but he raises the question that maybe Nache wouldn't be appropriate, because people because people already living in Eretz Yisrael already. It wasn't under Jewish control, but they were going back, and then he was discussing. And I'm sure Yerushalayim looked nothing then like it looks now. So he already the first to entertain it, but there's no halacha l'maisa. Rev Goren, who was one of the chief rabbis in Eretz Yisrael, independent thinker, to many very controversial. He said many things. Let's say certainly the Haredi world, and even many non-Haredi, many normative halacha, didn't go with this chidushim about whether it's now that when man went up to the moon, whether you could say you should just change the language in Kiddush Ravana, because it says something that we can't touch the moon or something. So the fact now that we can, but that's just one of the things. But the one we're focusing on, Nachem. He said, how can we say Nachem? Are you kidding me? After what happened, and so he took, I believe he took Nachem. Either he took Nachem out, or he changed maybe he changed the text to Nachem. But he was one very vocal about even taking Nachem out. Others weren't as bold as he was. Rav David Halevi, one of the Sephardi Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael, and I think he was Rabban Roshis in Tel Aviv. Other Sephardi Gedolim in Eretz Yisrael, they also raised this question, Mechse Kesheker, how can we say it anymore? So one changed it from, instead of saying present, I'm not bold enough to change, to get rid of it, but let's change it from past, let's change it from present to past, whatever the grammar is. Let's say Yerushalayim was desolate. It's not anymore. And others had that, and Rav Aaron Lichtenstein doesn't publicize this, but I heard from a couple people who spoke to him directly, and I'm not saying the yeshiva of Gush does this, because I'm not saying he's making a public psak. Maybe he doesn't want to. He's very conservative in nature as well. He wasn't willing to go as so far as, he understood the issue, but he wasn't going to go like Rav Goren, stop Nachem. He wasn't even going to go like others, change it. He felt maybe a little more subtle change was just to leave a couple of phrases which he felt were totally out of whack today. He just would leave a couple of phrases out. And that was his subtle way of saying, okay, I recognize changes, but in general, his nature was he wasn't, he was a Talmud of Rav Soloveitchik, who we'll see was a lot more. We'll get to hear what he had to say in a minute. He was very conservative about, in general, as we'll see by the Techelis issue, but by changing Nusach HaTfilah, as we'll see, he went crazy, apparently. If you speak to the people who were in his shir in 1968, when he heard this young rabbi in Israel wanted to make changes, he went crazy and said, chutzpah, how could someone change the Nusach HaTfilah? And he was totally against any change, in general and specifically here. And others point out that they made some changes, because they say, they claim if you look historically speaking, Nachem went through different gearses. At one point it was Rachem to Nachem. They claim there was 4 different texts anyway, and it wasn't something Anshe Knesset Gedola made up. So they claim we don't have to worry so much about changing. It's not carved in gold anyway, because there are many different. The one we have today isn't the original, so they kept on changing it. So they felt. So again, all these people don't go around changing tefillah lightly, but they felt as well. They felt there were many changes anyway. It wasn't from the Anshe Knesset Hagedola, and therefore they felt they don't have to. Therefore they can make the changes. But Rav Soloveitchik, he felt very strongly, not just Rav Soloveitchik, I could say certainly all the Gedolim in the yeshivish world wasn't even an issue. They don't even address the issue, because what's there to address? It's Pasha. We're going to say Nachem today. And the only one who addresses it, but says, of course, it's ridiculous to make a change. I think Rav Sternbuch writes it in one of in the Moadim B'Zmanim, he addresses it maybe in his foot. He entertains, there's some people who think because they're beautiful skyscraper, I don't know if he says that, I'm not sure what they had then, because there are beautiful buildings in Yerushalayim. They have the entertainment that we're not going to say Nachem anymore. It's ridiculous, and other people don't even. It's indifferent. They don't even like. It's not even something to entertain. Rev Sherma just throws out as a Havamina. He's obviously alluding. He knows people are doing it, and he says it's crazy. We don't have to look to Rav Sternbuch or the Yeshivish, or we can go to Rav Soloveitchik and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. They were very against the change in Nachem, and in fact, interesting among all people, I believe, Rav Avraham HaKohen Cook, is it Avram Yitzchak Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Cook. He was, of all people, against the change of Nachem. So obviously, it's nothing to do with your feeling for Yerushalayim. But what was the Rav's taina, and I'm sure echoes all the other Gedolim, is that basically we have to look at life. There are two ways of looking at life. There's a physical reality, and there's a halachic reality. Obviously, these other Gedolim are looking at, I'm not saying they're ignoring the halachic reality, but they're viewing, they say, halachic reality takes in the physical reality. And if the physical reality changes out there, we have a right to make changes. Obviously, the Rav did not think that way. The Rav felt reality, you have to put on your halachic glasses. And I don't care how beautiful Yerushalayim is, but I'm thankful that we have Yerushalayim. It's the best thing in the world. But when we talk about Yerushalayim is standing in Biza, what do we mean? It's a halachic text. And where does Kedusha Yerushalayim come from? It comes from its proximity to the Makam HaMikdash. The reason why Yerushalayim is holy isn't because it's a political entity, where some might argue on that point, but the Rav felt very strongly Yerushalayim is known in Tanakh is Lefnei Hashem Elokechem, and therefore that's why it has the Kedusha, and that's why it has its sanctity. And as long as there's no Beis HaMikdash, if the Beis HaMikdash is desolate, is destroyed, then Yerushalayim is always going to be considered as being therefore Chatz v'Sholom to make a change in the Nachem. And of course we leave the text. Of course we have the Chasdei Hashem, we recognize the gift of God, but changing the Nusach HaTzvilah, that's a whole different ballgame. In fact, in the new, I don't know how new it is, but what is it, Koren? I know the keynotes from OU. So actually in the introduction to the keynotes I saw, I think it's from Rabbi Haskell Luxstein. He writes he was he actually went to Eretz Yisrael in August, I guess Tisha B'Av of 1967, after they got back to Yerushalayim. He said he got in right before Tisha B'Av. He goes to, I think, Rav Goren's shul, Heichel Shlomo, whatever that big shul was. And he said the mood it was Tisha B'Av, but he was taken back. The mood was, everyone was so happy. Well, understandably so. It was just still living off the tremendous miracles of getting back to Yerushalayim. And the mood was definitely not a Tisha B'Av mood. And I think Rav Goren read Eicha, and then they started doing the keynotes. And then basically towards the beginning, middle, most people just packed out and left. They couldn't say keynotes. How could you say keynotes? We have Yerushalayim back. So Rav Luxstein writes, he and his wife felt there was something wrong with this, but that was it. And then about a year later, I think June 1968, he heard the shir from Rav Soloveitchik, and he summarized in the he wrote the summary of that shir. Rav Soloveitchik, as one of the Yortzeit shirim, a very strong message why we should still observe Tisha B'Av. Even by the fact we're post 1967, don't think we don't need Tisha B'Av anymore, and he goes through different reasons why even Mizman Hazeh we have to observe Tisha B'Av. I think one he writes is because we're not observing a past event, like all things in Judaism. We're observing Chayiv Adam L'Eros Es Atzmo, just like it's true by Pesach, by Shavuos. Tisha B'Av isn't a past event, as long as we don't rebuild the Beis HaMikdash, is how we're doing. Secondly, he goes into the Rambam, who writes that Tisha B'Av, even Bizman B'Yisheni, is a day of Avelos. What do you mean? You say Bizman B'Yisheni, they sat on the ground and they observed keynotes while they were doing Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash? He said, no, the Rav said, that's not the Pshat in the Rambam, but they were Mispalel, the Bizman B'Yisheni, that what happened during Bayis Rishon shouldn't happen with Bayis Sheni, which unfortunately did happen. So we have to be mitzvah. Yeah, we have Yushalayim now. We have to mitzvah. We have it, and we keep Eretz Yisrael and the binyan Bayis Shlishi. So it's very nogeya to us bisman hazeh. And then he goes on to, I think, a third reason as well of, as long as basically we have kashas, why us? We don't, and unfortunately, every generation, Jewish suffering, anti-Semites, we don't have to look too far. I think as they put it, as long as we're reading Eicha with the question mark, and not with an exclamation point, so we know we still have to observe Tisha B'Av. So the Rebbe went on to give a whole share on why he thinks Tisha B'Av is alive and well, unfortunately. Until we have Binyan Beis HaMikdash, Yerushalayim is B'Chorbanu, and therefore he was very strong to keep Nachem. And so again, so among different Gedolim, you had how far they wanted to go. You had Rav Goren on one extreme taking out Nachem, to Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. He was very conservative also, not to change the text, but this is from someone, this is oral transmission. It's not like he's going out and paskening this to people, but he just doesn't want, maybe he took out certain words, but Rav Soloveitchik, and he's with them, and apparently Rav Kook as well, that no, Yerushalayim is considered B'Chorbanu even today, and therefore Nachem sticks. So therefore, obviously, if you hold like that to the fact that maybe you couldn't bring you wouldn't necessarily, you can't bring, that's all he says, you can't bring a raya from this Gemara, because this Gemara is talking about they actually had the Beis HaMikdash. Yeah, but it's not a kash. Either way, this Gemara is not a kash against observing Yom Yerushalayim. You just can't bring me a raya, because, and certainly if you're going with the Rav's pshat, that Yerushalayim gets its kedusha, that could be part of the discussion on observing Yom Yerushalayim. I mean, the Rav can still hold you observe Yom Yerushalayim, it's just still B'Chorbanu. The fact that we have Yerushalayim, it could be a day to observe, it could still be a Klaza Yantav, it's just not the full deal because we don't have the Beis HaMikdash. That ties on to a major question of Nachem, and we'll have to go into it more. This ties into another halach l'maisa shaila of Kriya, of Kriya when we say Yerushalayim, because it's halacha that you have to do Kriya when you see Yerushalayim. Does that apply post 67? So does that ties into this, and then we'll have to go into it more, because actually some make a distinction regarding, like Rav Moshe Feinstein, which the Rav's very consistent, Kriya on Yerushalayim even today. But let's say Rav Moshe Feinstein, Rav Kook on the other hand, make a distinction between no Kriya on Yerushalayim versus versus the halacha of changing Nachem. So why that distinction we'll have to get into. So that's I lost count already. That's the fourth reason of why it happened on Tu B'Av. So what have we discussed? We've discussed intermarriage, the good kind of intermarriage among the tribes. The second intermarriage that you can marry with Sheva Binyamin. Number 3, we discussed it's the day that the Meisei HaMidbar stopped dying, and therefore we recognize that day. And 4th is it's the day that Hoshea ben Elah took away the guards on the road, and the Jews had the opportunity to go into Yerushalayim and the Beis HaMikdash to be Ola Regel. So those are 4 reasons. We'll have to continue. We'll continue tomorrow or later with a couple more reasons, and about why we celebrate Tu B'Av.